Basic premise: considering the relationship between horror and terror. Start by pushing them into polar opposites, suggest a few differences, have some examples of a few of them, then bring them together, sort of. Stephen King, horror writer, reflected on his craft in Danse Macabre, at various points following the lead of various Gothic authors who identified the value in disentangling horror from terror. I like this particular formulation, the way it imposes order by means of a hierarchy and reinforces our adherence to the notion that height connotes superiority. So, trying to further categorize the distinction, and thinking idly it'd be great to get a gag reflex in here somewhere, I generated this table. Variously, and with differing levels of conviction, I think that terror precedes horror. We associate it with apprehension and dread, with the thing to be dreaded presumably yet to be encountered, but nonetheless out there, reminiscent of Dr. Frankenstein's quest to find his monster in the Arctic wastes. It preys on the mind, and perhaps because of its durational quality, has the possibility of transcending everyday existence, perhaps because it places us in a heightened state of awareness. I'd argue that this heightened state is only possible by attenuating other thoughts and concerns. All else is subjugated to the thing that we fear, and mindful of the title, if not the substance of Guy's paper, I'm drawn to Aristotle's remark that nature abhors a vacuum, which rendered in Latin gives us horror vacui. Some examples. Here's something horrible. And by contrast, two examples that might induce terror or, conversely, relaxation. How these two sounds affect you is determined by the way in which you frame them. Are you in control of the descent, perhaps into a longed-for state of calm, or can you not shake the fear that you are falling toward an inevitable point of impact? The imposition of order on impending disaster allows us to suppress fear, even if the thing we fear is still present. I imposed a further distancing device on impending calamity with the choice of music. If I were focusing on horror at this point, it wouldn't be too much of a leap to show the shower scene in Psycho and consider how both Tomasini's cutting and Herman's composition ramp up the horror of the moment. But for terror, I'll turn to Fred Zimmerman's High Noon. In the following excerpt, a diligent YouTuber has composited the various clock shots that invert the principle of order, suppressing terror. The truncation of the sequence is an act of violence itself, but, 5 minutes. So here's the very regulation of civilization meted out in units of time, chopped and reframed so that the pendulum itself becomes akin to the Reaper's scythe. At this point, I really wanted to gush over Greenaway's The Cook, the Thief, His Wife and Her Lover, because of its unflinching transformation of food from transport of delight to vessel of dread, but we'll skip straight to the gag reflex. Mary Douglas, and before her Claude Levi-Strauss, have considered the ways in which we process food as much mentally as physically in order to get it into our bodies, and it always intrigues me to think of the very first brave soul who tried a new foodstuff, and their various companions who perished by making the wrong choices. These days, I have almost entirely forgotten that this egg came out of the business end of a bird and contains within it an unborn creature. Though I have been known to shudder when I see a feather stuck to an egg, and maybe hold in the back of my mind that I'll find something other than the pleasing yellowy, orange and white gloop when I crack the shell, but I'd like to leave that all out there, swirling around as I prepare my first prairie oyster, the name itself suggesting an ironic tilt at the disparity between refined tastes and a barren landscape. And to end, I want to consider the moment of transition between terror and horror, precisely the point at which your fate is not only possible or probable, but definite. A moment of such certainty and clarity that we have a brief respite from the oppression of terror, perhaps even welcoming the release. I'd like to think it's a liminal state akin to the moment of your life, supposedly flashing before you prior to death. I recall such a moment when, having, and this is a long time ago, stolen a motorbike from my friend's father's garage, the pair of us, unfamiliar with such speeds, careered around a housing estate in an alarming and frankly terrifying fashion, until inevitably we hit a curb at speed and flew towards a wall. The fractions of a second elongated into great arcs of contemplative thought. Were there helmets in the garage we could have taken? Because in the event of having an unplanned meeting with a wall, a helmet would be really useful. Again, as walls have a way of focusing the mind on such details, was it really that important that I sat in front? Because my friend is also going to crash into me, crashing into the wall. There are several more pages of this stuff with the word wall becoming ever more present in each thought, but I'll conclude with the horror of impact. Thank you.